Imagine a place where hope doesn't exist, where the walls close in on you and the air feels heavier with every breath, where the echoes of screams and the sound of shackles are part of the daily rhythm. This isn't a scene from a movie. It's the reality in some of the world's most notorious prisons. These places are more than just institutions of punishment. They are tombs of the human spirit, where suffering is measured not by years, but by the agony of each passing day. From the desolate isolation of ADX Florence in the US to the brutal, lawless chaos of La Sabaneta in Venezuela, prisons like these serve as dark reminders of what happens when the justice system turns its back on humanity. Inmates live under extreme violence, torture, and abuse. And for many, the hope of escape is not just distant, it's impossible. But these prisons are not just about the worst of humanity. They also show the survival instincts of those who dare to live in the most horrific conditions. In this journey, we'll explore the world's most dangerous prisons, where survival isn't guaranteed and the price of freedom is often far too high. Prisons are meant to punish and rehabilitate, but some cross the line into pure nightmares. Across the globe, there are prisons so dangerous, so brutal, that surviving them becomes a battle of willpower. These aren't just places of punishment, they're hell on earth. Inside these walls, violence, corruption, and inhumanity rule, and the line between survival and death is razor thin. Imagine living in a tiny cell, 23 hours a day, with no sunlight and no human contact, or sharing a space built for 100 people with over 1,000 inmates, fighting for food, water, and even air. For some, the guards are just as deadly as the prisoners. For others, gang wars and riots are part of everyday life. Escape isn't an option, because the horrors inside are often worse than death itself. But what makes these prisons the most dangerous in the world? Is it their notorious inmates, serial killers, terrorists, and war criminals? Or is it the brutality, corruption, and lawlessness that exist within the prison walls? The answer is both. Today, we'll take you on a chilling tour of the 12 most dangerous prisons around the world. From the frozen isolation of Russia's Black Dolphin Prison to the gang-controlled chaos of Venezuela's La Sabaneta, each of these prisons has a terrifying story to tell. You'll witness the darkest side of human nature, where survival means losing your humanity. Stay with us as we count down these deadly prisons, each more terrifying than the last. And by the end, you might find yourself questioning, does the punishment fit the crime, or do these places create monsters even worse than the ones they hold? ADX Florence, USA, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Welcome to ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Built to house the nation's most dangerous criminals, this supermax prison is designed to break the human spirit. Here, isolation isn't just a punishment, it's a way of life. Inmates spend 23 hours a day alone in small, windowless cells made of concrete. There are no bars, only thick steel doors with tiny slots, making human interaction almost impossible. Even during their 1 hour of recreation, they are placed in a small concrete pen known as the yard, which feels more like a cage for animals than a place to stretch. The prison is home to some of the most notorious criminals in modern history: Terry Nichols, Oklahoma City bombing; Ramzi Youssef, 1993 World Trade Center bombing; and even drug lord El Chapo Guzman. Despite their terrifying pasts, many of these criminals break under the extreme isolation of ADX. Psychological torment is common. Inmates have reported hallucinations, self-mutilation, and complete mental breakdowns. Former prisoner Thomas Silverstein, who spent 36 years in solitary confinement, described it as a slow, living death. But what makes ADX Florence truly horrifying is its perfect design. There has never been an escape, because there's nowhere to escape to. The prison sits in the middle of a desolate Colorado desert, surrounded by razor wire fences, armed guards, and surveillance systems that track every move. Critics call it legalized torture, while supporters say it's necessary to contain society's most dangerous figures. But here's the chilling truth. Surviving ADX. Florence isn't about escaping the prison. It's about escaping your own mind. And this is just the beginning. Next, we travel to Russia's most feared prison, where hope goes to die. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. If ADX Florence breaks the mind, then Black Dolphin Prison in Russia crushes the soul. Located near the Kazakhstan border, this prison is a fortress of pain, designed for the absolute worst offenders, murderers, cannibals, and terrorists. It's said that once you enter Black Dolphin, you never leave alive. Here, 24/7 surveillance isn't just a security measure, it's a form of control. Inmates are monitored through cameras, motion detectors, and regular cell checks. Guards rotate every 2 hours to prevent relationships from forming, and prisoners are moved only under a strict and humiliating procedure, blindfolded, handcuffed, and bent forward with their arms twisted behind their backs. This position, known as the stress pose, disorients prisoners and prevents them from mapping the prison's layout, because escape is not an option. Cells are nothing more than tiny cages within cages, measuring just 50 square feet. Behind thick steel doors and bars, inmates sleep on metal bunks, watched constantly by overhead cameras. Even their windows are built high and frosted to ensure they never see the outside world. The prison's 700 inmates have committed unspeakable crimes, collectively responsible for over 3,500 murders. But survival inside Black Dolphin is its own punishment. Inmates are on a strict schedule, with no leisure, no visits, and no outdoor recreation. Their only relief? A 90-minute walk in another cage, no bigger than their cell. Most prisoners break under these conditions. Years of isolation turn even the most hardened criminals into hollow shells. As one guard famously said, "The only way out of Black Dolphin is in a coffin." But if you think Russia's Black Dolphin is the worst the world has to offer, wait until you see what happens inside Venezuela's La Sabaneta prison, where the inmates, not the guards, run the show. Carandiru Penitentiary, Brazil, now closed, but infamous Carandiru Penitentiary wasn't just a prison, it was a war zone. Located in Sao Paulo, Brazil, it was once the largest prison in South America, housing over 8,000 inmates in a facility built for just 4,000. But Carandiru's reputation wasn't about its size, it was about its violence, disease, and death. The prison was a lawless city where gangs ruled and survival meant choosing a side. Guards rarely entered the cell blocks, leaving inmates to settle disputes with makeshift weapons. But Carandiru's darkest day came on October 2nd, 1992, during what would be known as the Carandiru Massacre. A riot broke out, and the military police were called to restore order. What followed was pure horror. Police stormed the prison, opening fire on unarmed inmates. When the smoke cleared, 111 prisoners lay dead, most shot execution style in their cells. Survivors spoke of police brutality, men shot with their hands raised, others killed while hiding under beds. The massacre became a symbol of Brazil's brutal justice system, sparking outrage worldwide. But violence wasn't the only killer inside Carandiru. Disease ran rampant, with HIV and tuberculosis spreading through the overcrowded cells. According to prison doctor Dr. Drauzio Varela, who worked there for over a decade, 1 in 5 inmates was infected with HIV, a crisis fueled by unprotected sex, shared needles, and the complete absence of medical care. Despite the horror, Carandiru stood for years, a monument to suffering, until it was finally demolished in 2002. Today, the site has been turned into a park. But the memories of what happened there remain a dark stain on history. If you think Carandiru was deadly, just wait, because next we're heading to Venezuela's La Sabaneta prison, where the inmates run everything, and chaos rules. La Sabaneta prison, Venezuela? Welcome to La Sabaneta prison, where chaos reigns and survival is a daily fight. Located in Venezuela, this prison wasn't run by guards or the government. It was ruled by the inmates themselves, making it one of the most lawless and dangerous places on earth. Built to house 700 prisoners, La Sabaneta crammed in more than 3,700, turning the prison into a human pressure cooker. Overcrowding, disease, and starvation were daily realities. But what made La Sabaneta truly terrifying was that it operated under a system known as pran rule, where powerful inmates, called prans, controlled everything from food and water to weapons and life itself. Want a place to sleep? You paid. Want protection? You paid more. Refuse, and you could end up dead. Violence was a way of life. In 1994, a brutal massacre erupted when rival gangs clashed, leaving 108 inmates dead. Many were burned alive or hacked to death with machetes, while guards stood by, too afraid to intervene. Death wasn't a possibility, it was an expectation. But death didn't only come from violence. Disease ran rampant due to horrific conditions. Cholera outbreaks killed dozens. With almost no medical care, a minor wound often became a death sentence. La Sabaneta's lawlessness was so extreme that inmates openly carried guns and grenades, turning every day into a potential battlefield. Some areas became literal war zones, and the guards, completely outnumbered, controlled only the perimeter, leaving the inside to the prisoners. The Venezuelan government finally shut down La Sabaneta in 2013, but its legacy lives on as a chilling reminder of what happens when a prison becomes a kingdom of criminals. But if you thought gang rule was terrifying, wait until you see the Bang Kwang prison in Thailand, where prisoners face brutal punishments and death row's iron grip. Bang Kwang Central Prison, Thailand, Bangkok Hilton. Nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton for its infamous reputation, Bang Kwang Central Prison in Thailand is anything but luxurious. Built for the most dangerous criminals and drug offenders, it's a place where brutality and suffering are part of everyday life. From the moment they arrive, prisoners face terror. All new inmates are shackled with heavy iron chains for the first 3 months, and some remain chained for years. These chains aren't just painful. They're a reminder that freedom is a distant dream. Cells built for 8 people often hold 20 or more, forcing inmates to sleep in shifts on filthy concrete floors. Disease, malnutrition, and heat exhaustion are constant threats, and the food, mostly rice and watery soup, is barely enough to survive. Those without money to buy extra food from the prison shop are left to starve. But the real terror is on death row, where prisoners live with the constant fear of sudden execution by lethal injection. Inmates are often informed of their execution just hours before it happens. No time for goodbyes, no time for peace. For many, Bang Kwang isn't just a prison, it's a slow death sentence. Next, we enter Evin Prison in Iran, where political prisoners face horrors beyond the imagination. Evin Prison, Iran, known as Evin University for the sheer number of intellectuals, journalists, and activists imprisoned within its walls, Evin Prison in Iran is a place of silence, fear, and suffering. But this is no school. It's a house of horrors where survival means enduring the unendurable. Built in 1972 in northern Tehran, Evin became notorious for holding political prisoners, dissidents, and anyone the government deemed a threat. Inside, prisoners face intense interrogation, torture, and solitary confinement, all designed to break their bodies and spirits. Survivors tell of beatings, mock executions, and psychological torment that can shatter even the strongest minds. The prison is divided into blocks, with Ward 209, controlled by the Intelligence Ministry, being the most feared. Here, prisoners disappear into tiny windowless cells, isolated for months with no contact with the outside world. Inmates are often denied legal representation, and executions are swift and sudden. In 2022, a massive fire broke out during riots inside Evin, killing several inmates and exposing the prison's brutal conditions to the world. For those who survive Evin, the scars, both physical and emotional, last a lifetime. Next, we enter Gitarama Prison in Rwanda, where overcrowding reaches unimaginable extremes, and death is an everyday companion. Gitarama Prison, Rwanda. Gitarama Prison in Rwanda isn't just a prison, it's a death trap. Built to hold 400 inmates, it became home to over 7,000 following the 1994 Rwandan genocide, turning it into one of the most overcrowded prisons in the world. Inmates are crammed together, standing shoulder to shoulder for days, weeks, even months. There are no beds, no proper sanitation, just a sea of people fighting for every inch of space. With the ground covered in human waste and filth, infections eat away at prisoners' feet, causing gangrene so severe that many have their limbs amputated without anesthesia. But the most horrifying part? Some inmates turn to cannibalism, driven by extreme hunger and madness. In this living nightmare, the strong preyed on the weak, because the dead offered the only chance for survival. Medical care is almost non-existent, and diseases like dysentery and tuberculosis spread uncontrollably. Guards rarely intervene in the violence, and survival often depends on forming gangs or paying bribes for protection. Gitarama isn't just a prison, it's a place where humanity collapses under the weight of suffering. Next, we visit San Pedro Prison in Bolivia, where prisoners run an entire city behind bars. San Pedro Prison, Bolivia. San Pedro Prison in Bolivia is like no other place on earth. Located in La Paz, it's more like a small city than a traditional penitentiary, because here, the prisoners run the show. This prison is unlike any other, as it is divided into sections, with each section functioning as its own mini-society. Inmates purchase their cells, with prices ranging from small, cramped spaces to luxurious apartments. The wealthy prisoners live in comfort, with access to televisions, gourmet food, and even alcohol. Meanwhile, the poorest inmates are forced to sleep on the floor and fight for every scrap of food. Families live inside San Pedro, as prisoners are allowed to bring their wives and children into the prison. This strange arrangement leads to a complex social structure where some prisoners essentially live normal lives within the walls, while others fight just to survive. The prison even has its own market, where drugs, weapons, and goods are traded freely, making it a lawless kingdom of its own. The guards have little control over the chaos. Instead, power is held by the Pran, or the prison's leader, who oversees the entire operation. San Pedro is a world unto itself, where crime and corruption thrive unchecked. Next, we enter Camp 22, North Korea's most notorious labor camp, where human rights violations are pushed to extremes. 9. Camp 22, North Korea. Camp 22, officially known as Kwalaso Number 22, is one of North Korea's most secretive and horrifying prison camps, designed for the country's most disloyal citizens, those accused of political crimes or suspected of dissent. It's so secretive that for years, the world didn't even know it existed. Located in the remote, frozen wilderness of North Korea, Camp 22 was infamous for its brutal conditions and the complete lack of human rights. Political prisoners, their families, and even children as young as 5 years old were incarcerated here, often for 3 generations. The regime's belief was that entire families could be guilty of crimes simply by association, so entire bloodlines were wiped out. Inmates were subjected to forced labor, torture, and starvation. Work in the camp involved hard manual labor, often in freezing temperatures, with little to no protection from the elements. Those who couldn't work were left to die of hunger, disease, or abuse. Guards were trained to view prisoners as subhuman, and executions were frequent for anyone caught attempting to escape. Though Camp 22 was officially closed in 2013, its dark legacy endures as a symbol of the extreme cruelty of the North Korean regime. Next, we head to Patak Island Prison, Russia, where isolation and terror are part of the daily routine. 10. Patak Island Prison, Russia. Patak Island Prison, located in the White Sea, off the coast of Russia, is a place of terrifying isolation, designed to break the spirit of even the most hardened criminals. Situated on a small, remote island, the prison is only accessible by boat, and its surroundings are as bleak and cold as the horrors inside Patak Island, also known as the Russian Alcatraz, houses Russia's most dangerous prisoners, those who have committed heinous crimes and are deemed too dangerous for the mainland. With only about 100 inmates, it is small but intensely brutal. The most chilling aspect of Patak Island is its permanent isolation. Prisoners are kept in solitary confinement for the majority of their sentences, with no contact with other inmates or the outside world. Their cells are bare concrete, with only a small window, and the bitter cold seeps into every corner of the prison. It's a place where time seems to stand still and prisoners lose any sense of reality. Inmates are subjected to harsh conditions, with little food, insufficient medical care, and constant surveillance. Many have reported mental breakdowns, driven by the constant sense of abandonment and the relentless cold. Patak Island is not just a prison, it's a living death sentence designed to erase the very soul of those confined there. Next, we arrive at Rikers Island in the U.S., where violence between inmates and guards escalates beyond control. 11. Rikers Island, USA. Rikers Island is the most infamous jail in the United States, often considered a house of horrors. Located in New York City, this sprawling facility houses over 7,000 inmates at any given time, with many awaiting trial rather than serving sentences. Known for its brutal conditions and pervasive violence, Rikers has earned a reputation for unchecked brutality and lawlessness. What sets Rikers apart is its sheer chaos. Prisoners often face physical violence not only from fellow inmates, but also from guards who have been accused of torture, abuse, and negligence. Gang warfare is rampant, and for many inmates, life on Rikers is a constant struggle for survival. The jail is severely overcrowded, and the conditions are some of the worst in the country. Inmates are crammed into tiny, filthy cells with little to no privacy. Inmates regularly report beatings, harassment, and verbal abuse from the guards, who sometimes instigate violence. Rikers Island has also been known for mental health crises. Inmates often face long periods of solitary confinement, which has led to suicides and serious mental breakdowns. In 2021, the City of New York announced plans to close Rikers Island, but its legacy of violence and corruption will leave a permanent scar on the justice system. Next, we end our journey in the notorious La Modelo prison in Colombia, where survival means navigating extreme violence and gang control. Diyarbakir Prison, Turkey. Diyarbakir Prison in Turkey is known for its brutal treatment of inmates, particularly those accused of political crimes. Located in the Kurdish-majority region of southeastern Turkey, it became infamous for the torture and abuse that prisoners endured, especially during the 1980s and 1990s, after the military coup. This prison is notorious for its use of psychological and physical torture, including beatings, electric shocks, and solitary confinement for extended periods. Inmates were often subjected to mental and physical breakdowns, with reports of starvation, forced stress positions, and sexual abuse. The most harrowing part of Diyarbakir Prison's legacy is its treatment of political prisoners, many of whom were detained simply for their activism or ethnicity. The Kurdish prisoners, in particular, faced extreme abuse, as the government used the prison to punish those they viewed as a threat to the state. Diyarbakir Prison became a symbol of resistance for many, but also a place of despair and suffering. The cruelty endured by prisoners turned it into a place where hope was stripped away, and survival seemed impossible. Although conditions have improved in recent years, Diyarbakir Prison remains a dark reminder of Turkey's oppressive tactics against its own citizens. This concludes our journey through the world's most dangerous prisons, a haunting reminder of human suffering, where survival often comes at the cost of everything else. The prisons we've explored in this journey are some of the most dangerous and horrifying places on Earth. From ADX Florence in the US, where isolation breaks the spirit, to Diyarbakir Prison in Turkey, where political dissent leads to unimaginable torture, these facilities represent the darkest sides of humanity's justice system. What ties them together is their dehumanizing nature. Each facility pushes prisoners to the brink, whether through physical abuse, mental torment, or unrelenting isolation. Yet, despite the brutality, these prisons also serve as grim reminders of the lengths governments and systems will go to maintain control and punishment. The question remains, how do we, as a society, move forward when such horrors exist in our world? These prisons force us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, corruption, and human rights. They challenge us to think about justice, punishment, and the true cost of keeping people behind bars. As we close this chapter on the world's deadliest prisons, one thing is clear. These places are not just about punishment. They are about control, and the struggle to survive in them is a fight not only for freedom, but for basic dignity. The legacy of these prisons lingers long after the bars are closed.